Thank you very much. I never liked hearing my own voice through a microphone, but such is, I guess, what we have. So I got an email from John a few months ago asking if I would be willing to introduce Bob. Most terrifying email. It's one of these tasks in which you can't say no, but you know that you can't do a good job either, because nothing is good enough for Bob. It's whatever I say, it's not going to be enough. But here I am anyway. I mentioned my anxieties to a few people. One of them was Dave Forney, Erdal Arakan, Shan Yuan Ho, John Spinelli. Dave came up with a good suggestion. He said, well, if you have these anxieties about Bob, simply talk about me. I ended up not taking the suggestion for maybe obvious reasons. But the best advice maybe came from something that I remember from Bob telling me. He said that anything that is worth doing, really doing, is worth doing badly. So, and my own dictum is that don't do today what you can do tomorrow. Recipe for disaster, perhaps. But here I am, so hier stehe ich, ich kann nichts anderes. So, maybe I should say a few words about Bob as an advisor. I don't want to go through a list of CV, publication lists, accomplishments, and so forth. This would be A, too long, and then B, you can read them through Wikipedia or something. My first day at MIT, I came to visit Bob. He was my supervisor, and he had given me an assistantship. So I show up in his office, and Bob tells me, I've given you this assistantship and you're paid, but you should not feel obligated to work for me. If there is some other professor that you would be more interested in working with, you should feel completely free to work with them, and I will actually still pay you. So you have your funding from me, but it is perfectly okay if I work with somebody else. I was naive enough to actually take this seriously. So I went around, asked my student colleagues to say, this guy, Bob, he's telling me that I should work for maybe somebody else. So shall I really go around? They said, you're crazy. So just stay where you are. And I'm glad that they told me so. And I avoided disaster. And I should count my blessings for having stuck with him. When you work with Bob, you had this feeling that his time was yours. When you met with him, the impression that you got was he had nothing better to do, nothing more interesting to do, just to listen to you talking about your research and trying to help you out, and as if the rest of the world didn't exist. And now that I'm an academic myself, I mean, I don't know how he did this, because we are all pressed for time. As Sandro Mitter once said, everybody wants a chunk of your time, and somehow he managed to find time for us, all of his students, and it's the uniformly opinion of everybody else that I've spoken to. His time was yours. He also had the very uncanny ability to make you feel good about yourself. I mean, as a graduate student, as a researcher in general, it's still true for myself, my steady state is that I'm stuck at this. So whatever I'm trying to do, nothing I try works, okay? And not only I'm stuck, but everybody else seems to be doing very well. So, I mean, maybe it's me, but I look around me, I always see people who are always doing some very successful things, very interesting things, and I'm there, I mean, feeling like an idiot. And my instinct was to hide from Bob in these things, and then Bob would come and find me. After a few weeks of not seeing me, Bob would come and find us. He said, let's have a talk. And then Bob would explain that this was, in fact, a completely normal thing, that he himself had the same anxieties, that he would wake up at night. Whether I should tell this thing, I don't know, but I will anyway. That he would say that tomorrow they'll discover that I'm a fraud, and they'll take away my degrees, they'll take away my job, and I'll be fired and I'll be exposed. So if you hear as a student that even someone like Bob had these anxieties, it makes you calm a lot better. Now, Bob was, of course, an extremely intelligent person, very, very smart, maybe the smartest man I actually know. But most smart people, at least they go through a phase in which they try to convince you that they're smart. You meet with them, and my God, okay, this is the most irritating thing. I mean, they try to show how smart they are. Most people grow out of this. Some of them never do. I hope not many of them are in this room. I don't know if Bob had ever had such a phase. Bob would make you feel smart. So you would be there hopeless. He would say something, he would say some encouragement, point out some particular aspect that you were not really thinking of, and then you will leave the room with lots of hope, saying, yes, this is great. I think everything is going to work out. I'll push, and then things will be fine. You'll feel really much better about yourself and how he will make you feel better. I don't know anybody else who can do this. He also trusts his students. I once asked him, what do you do with someone like Berlekamp? Because Elvin Berlekamp was Bob's student. Obviously a genius. How do you supervise such people? And Bob told me, you don't. You simply let them be. You don't guide them. You maybe touch them left and right a little bit, not with this thing that we were doing in the morning with trying to get the pole sticking up. You try to just very gently guide and then trust them that they're going to do the right thing. I think it was a very important quality. And I try not to do this with my own students if I can. His wisdom on publishing was also very sound. He told me that no one was going to remember me by the length of my CV or the publication list, that they will be remembered by a few good things that we did, the nuggets, he called them. Whether in this day and age this can be actually practiced, I don't know. Maybe the current world of academia is not conducive to this, but at least something we should strive for. And he would tell us not to pollute the journals with the latest random half-baked idea, but wait until we have something interesting to say. After graduating from MIT, I went to Bell Labs. And there I realized how important Bob was. He was so kind and he was so generous to everybody, and he had built up so much goodwill that this reflected partly on his students. So when I showed up, I had instant credibility, which is maybe less important because I think eventually you will establish yourself anyway, but you had instant goodwill. People really wanted to take care of you because they know that you were Bob's student, because he had somehow touched many people's lives there, or I guess anybody in our community. And this was, I benefited from this enormously. I'm deeply in his gratitude, and that. One person who was very important at Bell Labs was Aaron Weiner, who was my first employer. And Aaron told me a story about Bob, and I think late 1960s, 67, John Wiley and Sons had contacted Aaron, and they sent him a preprint or a pre-publishing copy of Bob's information theory text with the instructions that he was supposed to read through this book and find typos, and he was paid for this. They had given some significant amount of money, I think, to this review job. And Aaron said that he felt extremely guilty about this particular assignment because he could not find a single error. He went through the whole book. I think he found one typo, he said, and then he got paid the full thing. And he was convinced that Wiley was convinced that he had actually not read the book and just found some random stuff and sent it back. But this was, I think, how meticulous Bob is when he comes to writing. And he was also meticulous with us. For his students, he took our writing very, very seriously. He would make sure that even though nobody was going to read what I was writing, at least he did, and the writing should be for posterity, whether somebody reads it or not. You should be very careful. Bob's research, I think, is driven by a very strong sense of intellectual curiosity. I think he hears something, he gets interested, and he wants to understand whatever he has heard very deeply. I think his trajectory from coding, information theory, networks, later on wireless, stochastic processes, communication systems, I think all driven by curiosity and a need to understand and explain. And when he explains it so well that you don't want to read anything else ever again. Now, if I want to learn anything, if Bob has written about this, I go and look there, and I think it's the best place that we can do. He looks for simplification, unification. He had told me once that our job as researchers was not to add leaves to the knowledge tree, but to prune it, to somehow find that these 5 things are in fact the same thing. You cut them through and make them into a single entity, and that was more valuable than adding isolated knowledge to the branch. Similarly, teaching and explanation also drove his pure research too. I asked him once about how he came up with his 1965 paper on simple proof of the coding theorem. And he said he was supposed to teach it a week after in his classroom, and he was looking desperately to find a good way to present it to the students. And outcome was precisely this very simple and very clean derivation of the theorem. I should also say perhaps that among all the awards that he received, and these include things like the IEEE Medal of Honor, the Millennium Medal, things which I had in my mind just before I walked to this room, but I promptly forgot when I'm standing in front of you. Among these things, the one who admired or many appreciated most was a teaching award given by the graduate students. I think we can do very well by trying to emulate Bob in some small degree. I try to do this with a small amount of success, very little success, but even that I think makes me a better person than I would have been have I never met Bob myself. And we could all benefit from his wisdom. And I'm very grateful to for his concern for us as students, his care for us, his respect for us. And thank you very much, Bob. Thank you. I think Bob has a rebuttal.
Well, thank you very much, Emre, for that beautiful introduction. I wish it were closer to the truth, but things like this should be exaggerated a little bit, and I'm very happy about it. I also want to thank John and his committee for organizing this whole thing. I'm very grateful to that. But in the few minutes I have to talk, I want to reminisce a little bit. As you get older, reminiscing becomes very important to you. You just love to talk. But since I haven't given any lectures for a while, I'm going to use notes to talk and to explain a little bit about what happened in my career, and in fact, how I have treated students and how I view students and how I view research, because I think that might be worthwhile. I first arrived at MIT back in 1956, which was a very long time ago. It was mostly a scam at that point because I wanted to get out of the Army. I had been drafted as a private 2 years before and found the only way I could escape was to go to graduate school. So I thought, well, I will go to MIT and I will try to get a master's degree there. I wasn't very confident of my ability to do it because I just knew that MIT was a great place and I had very little confidence in myself. But I went there anyway. I was working for Pete Elias and Bob Fano, who were both who were really some of the best information theorists around at the time. Information theory was really a hot field back then, and the graduate students going into it were really remarkable. Most of them knew a great deal more than I did, and it always affected me from that time on that they were very kind to someone like me who was a little slower, a little more backward, and had a great deal to learn. But they were so kind and so decent. So it was a wonderful thing. Well, I went on for a while. I started to try to do a master's thesis. Bob Fano encouraged me in doing it, and I thought, gee, this is sort of fun. I looked back at it a while ago. It was absolute garbage. But anyway, I felt good enough after that I thought, well, why not try to get a doctor's degree? I mean, this opportunity here, MIT at that point was a center of the information theory world. Claude Shannon came a year after I did. Now that's, I mean, to say Claude Shannon came a year after I did is really about as, but anyway, he had come also and taught a course here the term before I got here in the fall of 1955. He taught a course where every lecture he came in and delivered some new result that he'd thought of the night before. And every one of them was beautiful. He didn't write any of them up. Scribes sort of recorded what he said. But you know, that kind of thing just led to an atmosphere which was something you couldn't ignore. It was something where I felt, well, if I can stay on a little longer, it's worth doing that. I can always go back to Bell Labs and do switching work. Switching work back then was like doing software now. It's something that's sort of mindless for the most part. Actually, I mean software where you're doing meaningless things, not software where you're doing important things. But anyway, I wasn't ambitious at that point. I don't know whether I've ever been ambitious, but the intellectual atmosphere around here was just very addictive, more so than alcohol, more so than tobacco. I suspect more than cocaine, although I never tried that. But anyway, I started out looking for a doctoral thesis, finally settled on a fun problem. It was totally impractical. It was something called LDPC, which you were just talking about earlier, which has been very important 40 years later. I would like to tell you that I was smart enough to know that would become important after a long enough time. I really wasn't. I had no idea that was ever going to be a practical thing. I thought it was a fun thing. It was a neat intellectual puzzle. Pete Elias encouraged me, so I went on and finally did it for my PhD thesis. It was rejected by the major conference in information theory in 1960, and that was a little bit discouraging. But anyway, I was offered an assistant professorship at MIT. I finally realized why. Peter Elias was becoming department head at the age of 36. He was somebody who was involved in so many different areas and so widely respected that he had a chance of holding the whole field together, which most people didn't. Bob Fano, who had been another pioneer in information theory, was just starting something called Project Mac, which was a computer project dealing with time-sharing computers, which was really what took computation and turned it from a small field into a very large and very active field. So they needed somebody to teach the information theory course, which is why they hired me. Well, anyway, I was very proud to have been hired. I thought, well, I probably can't do this very well, but I can always go back to Bell Labs and do switching work. So, well, anyway, I kept doing research, kept doing my best. But after I'd been teaching for about a year, gradually, slowly building up my confidence, who walks in the door but Elwin Berlekamp? Now, I don't know how many of you know Elwin Berlekamp, but he is a certified genius in all ways. The only way I could deal with him, every time he came in to talk, I wanted him to talk about his thesis. I felt it was important for him to get his thesis done and get out and do something else. He insisted on playing games with me. He always had a game to play. He always had the optimal strategy. He always beat me. And I got used to being beaten. And I said, well, this is the price I have to pay. And you know, I lived with it. And finally, when Elwin left, I started to build up my confidence again. And you know, who should walk in the door but Dave Forney, who you've just heard a little bit about, and you'll hear a great deal more about him. Confidence goes down again. I said, my God, I can't do this. I am totally lost here. But then Dave graduated, and I said, well, this is all right anyway. But I finally realized that I'd been extremely lucky because I learned how to be a decent professor in all of that. And you know, the answer was, you don't teach students. What you do is you help them, you support them, and you try to bring them to the point where they can learn things. And basically, you know, you realize that you and they are working together as learners in a place where the other people there are trying to learn also. Well, I had an enormous number of really fantastic students after that, all of them much smarter than I was. People like Emre, who you just talked to, David over there, who's going to give a talk later, Errol, who has invented polar codes recently, and which is the hot thing in coding now. Many wonderful students. But you know, I have always found that the way to deal with students is to say, I am so lucky to have this great person to work with. And that is the secret to being a good professor. People claim these days that there's a dichotomy between doing research and teaching. That's a very false dichotomy. Doing research is learning in one sense, not really learning. Doing research is trying to understand things. And teaching, it is not what people think of from the old days of going up to a board and writing on it in a pre-15th century mode of thinking that you write things, somebody else copies them down, and that's the way learning is passed on. You can't teach if you're not also trying to understand things yourself. So teaching is also the process of a community of people trying to understand things. What you're trying to understand is something we all grope with. We move from one thing to another. I had started out in RLE, which is where most of the communication was being done back in 1960. I then moved to LIDS in the middle of 1970. And that is where the networking was starting to be done. It's where there was this beautiful community of people interested in optimization, interested in mathematics, interested in communication, interested in control, and all of that just worked together to make this community where all of us could understand things. And working with students, there were these delightful times when you woke up in the morning and said, ah, the light has gone on. And every once in a while, the light goes on, and that's what keeps you going. And the one thing I miss being in Florida now is not having this wonderful community around me of other people who are also trying to understand things. Thank you.